Welcome back, Biology 104. Today we're going to be talking about Reptilia class. This would be rattles, venom, scales, and claws, the reptiles, on page 83 of your notes. So for class Reptilia, there are 4 orders that belong to the class Reptilia. The order Chelonia. For Chelonia, that's going to be your turtles and tortoises. Second order would be Sphenodontia, which would be the tuataras. Third order would be Squamata, which would be your snakes and lizards. And then the fourth order would be Crocodilia, which would be your crocodilians. So the remaining groups, reptiles, birds, mammals, are also called the amniotes, which exhibit 3 key characteristics. Number 1, amniotes have amniotic eggs. Number 2, amniotes have dry skin. And number 3, amniotes have thoracic breathing, which is where they use their rib cage and diaphragm to move air into and out of their lungs. So they breathe, or for amphibians rather, they breathe by squeezing their throat to pump air into their lungs, versus the amniotes that use the rib cage to move air in and out of their lungs. And here are some images of our Reptilia class. We've got some examples: turtles, iguanas, crocodiles, alligators, snakes. All of these are going to be in the Reptilia class. The characteristics of the class Reptilia: they have horny epidermal scales. The scales are composed of keratin, and this provides their protection. And also a major benefit of it is for the prevention of water loss. And especially in these desert biomes where a lot of these reptiles can live and thrive, it's very important that they do not lose water through their skin, and these scales help prevent that. For respiration, it's going to occur by the lungs. No species of Reptilia have gills. They produce amniotic eggs, which are covered with a watertight, leathery, or calcareous shell. These eggs are laid on land, so reptiles have made the transition to be fully terrestrial. Here is the amniotic egg diagram, and we'll look at 4 parts. Number 1 is the yolk sac, and the yolk sac provides food for the growing embryo. Number 2 is the amnion, and for the amnion, that's going to encase and cushion the embryo as it grows. The chorion its purpose is to exchange gases. The 4th is allantois, which collects metabolic waste. Everything in the egg has to be self-sustaining for that organism to fully develop at least its entire body plan. There was a controversy about eating, which this would be a different type of egg, but similar, different from the reptiles, but like chicken eggs. There was a big controversy about whether or not they are good for you because of the cholesterol levels and some other things. Well, it's really beneficial for children's brains when they eat chicken eggs, because an egg, it has everything that is needed to build an organism. So you can imagine all the nutrients are there for humans to develop ourselves. It's really great for development to eat eggs, even if when you become an adult, you can moderate that a little bit for the cholesterol or whatever. There are so many benefits to these eggs. So for the characteristics, more characteristics for Reptilia. They have 4 limbs, and each limb has 5 clawed toes. There are some exceptions where you will see 4, but generally it's going to be 5 clawed toes. They have a complete digestive system, a closed circulatory system, and similar to amphibians, they'll have a 3-chambered heart, but in certain organisms, it'll be 4-chambered, and for example, with the crocodilians, and they have 2 atria and 2 ventricles. They're going to be ectothermic. They're going to depend on the environment for that thermoregulation. So their metabolism will be a lot lower than mammals, for example, with endotherms, because they can't produce enough heat for themselves from metabolism, so they won't eat as much, and they'll actually change their behavior to adjust their internal temperature. Fertilization is internal via copulation. They have efficient strategies for water conservation. For example, their kidneys produce a semi-solid urine of uric acid crystals, and that prevents water loss. So these organisms are really well suited for desert biomes. Their salt glands will be near the nose and eyes, and that will excrete excess salt. The skulls for reptilia are interesting. There are 3 types we'll look at. You have anapsid, diapsid, and synapsid. An anapsid skull has no openings in the temporal area. An example of that would be a turtle. A diapsid skull has 2 temporal openings on each side of the skull. And for that, that'll be the rest of the reptiles and birds, actually. Another type of skull that there is for amniotes is synapsid, which would be a single pair of temporal openings. And that's what we see with mammals. So any amniotic or amniote organism, they're going to have one of these 3 skull types. And for our reptiles and turtles, we're going to have that anapsid and diapsid. And then for mammals, we're going to have that synapsid. So some of the benefits, here's a little diagram of these skull openings, or lack thereof. The benefit to more skull openings is there's actually more attachment points for larger jaw muscles. So it actually, having the openings, increases the force of the bite of the organism. It also makes the skull lighter. So especially for predators, that makes them more agile, which is also a huge benefit, which is pretty cool. So then for the anapsid skull, that's what that would look like. So you see there's no extra openings in the temporal area. Of course, they have the eye sockets and the nostrils, but there's no extra openings. So that diapsid skull, you can see how much extra space there is. And muscle attachment for the jawbone can attach in these areas, and there's just more room for bigger, thicker muscles. There's another image of this one, a synapsid skull. So for our order, Chelonia, we're going to have our turtles and tortoises. Characteristics, they're going to have no teeth. Instead, they have a beak. They have a shell, which provides their protection. And many of them can retract their head and legs into their shell for protection. The upper plate or dorsal plate on their back is called the carapace, and the ventral or lower plate is called the plastron. The shell is composed internally of bone with a keratinized outer layer of plates called shoots. The ribs and body vertebrae are fused to the interior side of the carapace, with the shoulder and hip girdles located within the rib cage instead of outside the rib cage. And if you look at turtles that have died and their soft tissue has rotted away, you can actually see those ribs fused to the carapace, which is pretty cool. So all turtles are oviparous, which means their sex determination. What oviparous means is that once their eggs are laid, they hatch after they have been laid by the parent. That would be oviparous. And the sex determination in these organisms is temperature dependent, which is pretty interesting. So for Chelonia, our turtles and tortoises, here are some images of those characteristics that we talked about. You can see the lack of teeth and the beak in this image. So here you can see the shell and the shoots and how they're in these plates that make up the shell, which is pretty cool. See the carapace on the dorsal side, the ventral side is the plastron. Their ribs, you can see here, they are fused to that internal side of the carapace. And then here it's showing some turtles, hatching from their eggs and climbing out of the little burrow and trying to get to the ocean as fast as they can. So they are oviparous. So they lay their eggs and then they hatch outside of their bodies. And depending on the temperature at which they're grown at, that will determine the sex of the offspring. For our next order will be Squamata. It's going to be your lizards and snakes. They're the largest order of reptiles. There's 7,000 species. And they're going to possess a diapsid skull, and they have very movable joints with those extra openings in their temporal area. They live in temperate, tropical, and desert habitats, and they're going to be carnivores. They eat other animals. What's really incredible about these is they can eat some really large animals, depending on the organism we're talking about. But like certain snakes, they can eat prey that is up to 75 to 100% of their own body weight. And some snakes are able to eat other organisms that are larger than their own size. So their ability to swallow prey that is larger than them, and especially than their heads. Like, how can you eat something that's bigger than your own head all at once, by the way? And that's because their jaw and skull allows for an extreme stretching. So they can just stretch around an organism. A python, for example, they've documented those to eat entire deers. They will swallow an entire deer, which is pretty crazy. They observed one small snake to consume a prey that was 10 times its own size. So they just stretch around what they eat. And I believe this was in Georgia, but this is a snake eating an entire deer, which is pretty wild. You can see it just stretches around it. Pretty terrifying to look at. A python can be anywhere from 2 to 20 feet long. That's how large they can get. And there's 4 people holding one in a field. So for the order Squamata, there's a suborder Sauria, which would be the lizards. Most of those are going to be terrestrial. Some can be marine and freshwater. They have elongated bodies with paired appendages, and there are some that are legless. They possess ears and eyelids, and they have the ability to regenerate their tails. So with if you have a legless lizard, how is that different than a snake? Well, legless lizards, even though they look like snakes, they are different because they have eyelids, they have external ear openings, which would be different, and their jaws are not as flexible as snake jaws. Snakes are going to lack those eyelids. They have transparent eye scales. They lack external ears, and they have jaws that are extremely flexible. Legless lizards will usually have smaller uniform scales and can actually still detach their tails, whereas snakes cannot do that. So for other suborder, this would be Serpentes, which would be the snakes. These are going to be limbless, but some species still contain the remnants of hind limbs, and they consider those vestigial structures for the snakes. They do not possess ears or eyelids. Many are venomous with special sensory organs. They have Jacobson's organ and pit organs. And the Jacobson's organ, that's what allows them to smell, and that's why you'll see snakes, they'll stick their tongue out, they'll flick it out, and then they bring it back in over and over and over. And what they're doing is they're picking up chemicals from the air, the soil, and they're bringing it back into their mouth. And they push it up against the roof of their mouth, even in the air, if it's just coming out in the air, and it helps them sense what is in the air. So it's like a really interesting way to sense smell. Then they have these pit organs, which allows vipers to sense heat differences within 0.003 degrees difference in their surroundings, which is pretty cool. So they have heat sensing organs and smell organs. For smell, that's Jacobson's organ. For heat sensing, that's called the pit organ. So for Serpentes, for these snakes, here are some images of what their bone structures look like. And you can kind of see that pelvic girdle. Looks like it would be for hind legs, but of course they don't have them, which is pretty cool. They have these pelvic spurs that poke out in that area, and that's what you can use to kind of locate that part of their bones. And then of course you'll notice they do not have eyelids or any openings for their ears. So for the type of snake movements we'll look at, the first movement is going to be what's called lateral undulation, or a serpentine movement. And if you think of a snake, this is a snake moving. This is probably what you're thinking of. This is just the S path. So they just make an S as they move. So they curve their body sideways against the substrate or the ground. That would be the lateral or serpentine movement. The concertina movement, that would be used when snakes are climbing trees or moving over smooth surfaces like pavement. So you could think of this as an accordion movement, right? The snake compresses and then it jumps out. It compresses and then it shoots itself out. So that's good for moving over smooth surfaces or climbing. And for the lateral undulation, that's good when snakes need to swim. To make that S motion is really good for swimming. So some other snake movements. The third would be rectilinear. And rectilinear movement is also called creeping. So many wide-bodied snakes use this form of movement. And basically what they do is their body, instead of making an S like flat on the ground, it's more of an S like a caterpillar going up and down as it moves over the surface of the ground. You can think of it like a caterpillar movement, which is pretty cool. And then the fourth is sidewinding, and that would be the type of movement that you'll see in the deserts. And the body is thrown forward in loops. And I'll show you little animations of each of these. So this would be that rectilinear. See, it stays in a straight line because it's coming up and down, which you can't really see very well as it moves over the surface. Here's sidewinder. Notice it's going sideways. So for this, they have to orient their heads about 45 degrees away from where they're trying to get, because they're moving at basically a 45-degree angle sideways as they move anywhere. Here's that lateral undulation. You'll see the snake, or the S shape for the snake. And then here's that concertina. See, it groups up, squirts out, like an accordion. And those are those different snake movements summarized here for you. So some special sensory structures in venomous snakes. That's going to be the Jacobson's organ and the pit organs. I know we already talked about that. And here are just some zoomed in images of what those look like. So that extra opening you'll see, that'll be for that pit organ. The Jacobson's organ is going to be on the roof of their mouth. So when they bring their tongue into their mouth and push it up against the roof of their mouth, they're letting those chemicals react with that Jacobson's organ, which is going to communicate with their brain, and they get to experience that sense of smell. So for the family Viperidae, this group has highly developed hollow fangs in the front of their mouth, and they're able to fold back against the roof of their mouth when they close their jaw. So that would allow for a very deep penetration of venom into their prey. So Viperidae is going to be the vipers. So to be able to tell these different families apart, you can look at their fangs. And in this case, they're hollow and they fold. Elapidae, these snakes have shorter, hollow fangs in the front of the mouth, and they are permanently erect. So they're always sticking up. The venom flows along the grooves, so the poison must be chewed into the wound. And that would include the cobra, sea snake, and coral snake. So for these organisms, the venom would need to be a higher toxicity because it has to get deeper into the organism, because they have to be able to chew on their prey. So they need more toxic venom because the fangs are shorter. Colubridae, this would be the next family, and they have grooved fangs in the rear of the mouth, and that would include what's called the boom slang. And that term boom slang is pretty interesting. Basically, it comes from Afrikaans, and the term boom means tree, and slang means snake. So boom slang is the name for it. And the boom slang snakes is extremely potent and toxic, but it's slow acting. So if someone gets bit by one, they might not think anything of it. They might think it was a dry bite or what they call a bluff strike, but then hours later, they may start to develop symptoms. So venomous snakes in Alabama, you have the timber rattlesnake. They're considered venomous pit vipers, and their venom is potent enough to kill a human. It introduces a mix of toxins that is fatal in up to 10% of victims. So if you get bit by a timber rattlesnake, you've got a 10% chance of dying from that bite. Now, you can be treated, and the treatment would involve immobilizing the injured part, cleaning the wound, wrapping the wound, and receiving an anti-venom, and you would get that at the hospital. So if you get bit by a snake and you don't know, just go to the hospital. Don't just wait to see what happens. That's what a rattler looks like. It's just interlocking pieces of keratin that allows it to have that signature sound when it moves back and forth. It's almost like a hard plastic, which is really cool. This would be the eastern diamondback rattlesnake. They can also be deadly, but people very rarely die from their bites. Here's a pygmy rattler, also a venomous snake in Alabama. They are not usually fatal to humans or animals, but they can be extremely painful. And if they're untreated, they can cause more serious long-term effects. But there's never been a documented death from a pygmy rattler bite. You have a cottonmouth or a water moccasin. So the bite of the cottonmouth is extremely dangerous, can be fatal. It's hemotoxic venom, which means it breaks down and destroys your blood cells and then any other tissues in the area, and reduces the ability of blood to coagulate or clot, so it could lead to excessive bleeding. Then you have the copperhead, and you'll notice the name. Their heads look copper in color. And we have a coral snake. So coral snake bites can be deadly as well, but their fatalities are also really rare. And a lot of this too is because people don't really spend a lot of time outside anymore. But should you spend some time hiking in Alabama and you come across a snake like this, and you're wondering, is it poisonous or safe, or if you get bit by it and then you got a good look at it afterwards, should you be that worried? Well, there's a popular rhyme. And this really only works in the United States and, in North America, really. And what it is, for coral snakes at least, red touches yellow, kill a fellow. Red touches black, venom lack. So red touches yellow, kill a fellow. You'll notice the red is touching yellow, but the red is not touching black. So if you saw a snake that looked like this, but the red touched the black instead, then it's likely to lack venom. Although there are some mimics, so you have to be careful. You can never know for sure, in other words. And these are the different types of toxins that snakes can have. You have proteolytic, which would be where it's enzymes that cause the degradation of tissues. Hemotoxic, it attacks the blood. Neurotoxic, it affects the neurons. And then cytotoxic, it attacks the cells. So for all of these names, they're named after what they attack, essentially. And then there's a list of example organisms of what type of venom that they have associated with that. And again, here's some stuff for recognizing venomous snakes, other than the rhyme. So if they have a triangular shaped head, a hognose snake is not poisonous, but flattens its head to appear poisonous. So with all of these, there's going to be some mimics out there. But if they have a triangular shaped head, you need to stay away. The pupil of the eye is vertical, then it's probably venomous. A single row of scales on the underside of the tail. Now, if you're having to get that close to look, you're probably not going to be able to figure that one out, so I wouldn't be doing that. An opening is present between the eyes and nostrils, which is heat sensitive. Then it's likely to be venomous. So for order Sphenodontia, that would be the Tuatara, and that contains one species called the Tuatara, and we consider it a living fossil. And being the remaining species of this ancient lineage of reptiles, it gives us an insight into what this has always looked like. It is largely nocturnal and is active at lower body temperatures. They have a third eye called a parietal eye, and that is in the top of their head, which does have a rudimentary lens. And in the dissection, you'll get to see one of these. They are endemic to New Zealand, and here's an image of what that third eye looks like. So if a predator flies over their head, it can pick up on that shadow, and then it can quit moving to avoid being detected or find cover. For the order Crocodilia, it's going to be your crocodiles, alligators, gharials, and caimans. And these are sit and wait predators. Right, your reptilia, they do not want to waste any energy because they have a lower metabolism, being ectotherms. So it's better for them to sit and wait. So they'll have fast over short distance advantage. So really quick acceleration, and then they tire very quickly and need to rest. So they like to burst from a hiding place. The eyes and the nostrils are on top of their heads. 4 chambered hearts, 2 atria, 2 ventricles. They have really good color vision. They possess a light reflecting layer in their eye called a tapetum, which enhances their night vision like we see in cows. A nictitating membrane covers their eye when they are under water. They're oviparous with parental care, and the sex determination is also temperature dependent. There are 27 species in 4 groups for the order Crocodilia. You're going to have your alligators, which there are 2 species. One is in China, one is in the United States. You have your crocodiles, which are going to be in tropical, subtropical areas. You'll see that in Africa, Asia, and America. And they're nocturnal. And then you have your caimans, which resemble alligators and are native to Central and South America. And then gharials, which are very well adapted for eating fish, which are really cool. They have these super long, slender snouts, and they're found in India and Nepal. So here's an alligator. You see the U-shaped snout is one way to tell them apart. Then you have the crocodile, which has a more V-shaped snout, and they have a large mandibular tooth that the arrows are pointing to here in the image. Then your caimans, they also have a U-shaped snout. You can tell they have a very different appearance. Almost looks like something more from Jurassic Park. And then you have your gharials, and they have that thin, elongated snout, as demonstrated there, which is really good for catching fish in the water, which is what you see here, where one has risen up to the surface to capture a fish. And there's just a little diagram so you can see some of those differences. Difference in that mandibular tooth between the crocodile and the alligator. And then here's just a summary of their differences that if you want to pause and look at, you can. But that is going to be our Reptilia notes.